Hello, hello, hello. This is Rebecca calling in from the Female Founderhood podcast. And this is literally where you just join in, eavesdropping on two female founders, having a chat, and we're going to talk about anything and everything, especially the blood, sweat, and tears on how we build businesses and raising babies and staying chill if we can. So today I am in a conversation with Nour Kayali. She's the founder of Kayali Yoga. And also, get this, she is the happiness executive at the Happiness Index. Isn't that what is like hashtag life goal is about? Just be happy. It's not even about the money, the title, the designer bags that you have. It's the happiness. So I am very happy to welcome Nour.
Hello. Hi. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here. It's a pleasure. And yeah, absolutely agree. I feel like, that's the real kind of point for me of living is to create those moments of joy, of happiness, sparking it in the most moments that we can, I'll say.
Yes. So before we dive in on both your work, tell me your origin story. Your heritage and where you are now. Yeah. Tell me more.
Sure. So I was born and raised in the UK, but as you might be able to guess, my name Nour is not a British name. My family are Lebanese, so from the Middle East. So I'm like a first generation kid. They immigrated over to England. I grew up here. I grew up in Surrey, which is, a very British area. So I did often feel like the odd one out. I wasn't allowed to do certain things that my friends could do. And I
Mm,
do feel like I grew up almost within two cultures. My grandma
mm,
raised me for a large portion of my life, and she doesn't speak
mhm,
any English, only Arabic. But then obviously I went to school in England, so I had that. And the Lebanese are very, very loud, very proud. So things like, putting your hand up and and being quiet and saying please and thank you. It
mm,
was very contrasting, let's say, because I would feel like I'd be like, oh,
mm.
why is my grandma shouting all the time? She'd be like, I'm not shouting, I'm talking. Um,
Oh
so
wow. Because I've
yeah.
never, I don't think I've ever met any Lebanese, like having actual conversation, you know, other than me lurking at Amal Clooney's Instagram. I don't know any other Lebanese. um, but Middle Eastern culture, there's a lot of overlap with Asian culture, right? Because we're practically neighbors. So Middle Easterns
Yeah.
are very often in between the European and the Asian in terms of behavior and culture and upbringing and so on. And I think it will be interesting as well. At one point, I interview my children who's being raised into different cultures as well. But
Are they
uh,
first generation kids?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And they're not even born here in the UK. So they had, especially the eldest, of course, he had 7 years of living in Indonesia and speaking the language, eating the food. And now I have to say he's a bit homesick because he said, I'm losing my Indonesian now. As in, he's not able to speak it anymore. He will understand what I'm saying,
Mm.
but he feels like, oh, I wanna relearn it now that he's 10. Um, so yeah, it will be very interesting. So you're obviously bilingual, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So do you,
And I'm glad I
how
am.
about with your parents?
Yeah, so with my parents, I tend to speak Arabic. My dad's English is a lot better than my mum's. So often, if we're going
Mhm.
into like a bigger discussion, we usually switch to English. I will say I used to go to
Uh-huh.
Arabic school on Saturdays, and I hated it at the time,
Ah.
but I am grateful for it now because I can speak Arabic, and whilst it's not like absolutely perfect, 'cause I'm not practicing it every single day,
Mhm.
I can definitely get by and interact with people in Lebanon and anyone who speaks Levantine Arabic, which is the countries like yeah, Lebanon,
Mhm.
Syria, Jordan, Palestine, like we can understand the same kind of accent.
Mm, mm, mm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's to me since I was a kid, because I'm just like purely Indonesian, but at the same time in my country there's what 350 languages spoken, and that's not even dialects. It's like proper different language, different grammar, vocab, and everything. And my mom used to be able to speak like
Wow.
five of them, and even that is just great. But they don't speak English. Um, but I knew since very young age having more language, no matter like it doesn't even matter how many people speak it in the world, but if you speak um, more languages, it will be sooner that you will find a common ground with whomever that you're speaking with in your context. That
Mm.
it's very good for relationship building, and eventually is very good for business building as well, right? Have you felt that way? Like you made quicker connection as soon as you meet a fellow Arabic speaking person.
Yeah, definitely. And just to add to that list, I think it's also good for the brain because from a young age you start to learn, how to shift gear, but also that some words exist in one language that can't be expressed in another, and vice versa. But definitely, it's always exciting when I meet somebody else who's an Arabic speaker. And quite often, I meet people who might know a few words or have tried Lebanese food or something, and you might get this the same with Indonesian
Mm,
food. People are like, "Oh, I love the food," um, and
yeah,
it's really lovely to hear as well that your 10-year-old wants to keep that connection, and that he has the desire
yeah,
to do that. I think that's really
yeah,
sweet.
exactly. That is really sweet. He tried Duolingo. Can you believe it? He tried Duolingo for Indonesian language, and
Oh,
it's well for me. It's like how ironic, you know. Literally, it's your mother tongue,
bless
and
him.
you have to buy Duolingo it. um, but
Oh,
yeah,
that's so sweet.
um,
I will say though that like when I sometimes speak with people, even in England, if there's a certain idiom or they use a certain phrase, um, like it sounds because I have such a British accent, it sounds like I would really know what they're talking about. But sometimes I'm like, I actually have never heard that phrase before. Um, maybe it's something that they grew up with, but I didn't. So yeah, I see
yeah.
like little differences there, but then I just say, okay, explain it. Let's hear what this explanation is.
Mm, I know what you mean. And vice versa. Like I have my good friend. She's Turkish, and we take every Friday. So like tonight, we're gonna see each other at the swimming pool because we take our kids to swimming lessons. And of course, every time here and there are phrases that she would say, "Oh, your daughter is so beautiful, mashallah." And because I understand that in the context of my Muslim sisters and brothers, they speak the religious Arabic phrases, right? Mashallah, inshallah, all of that, alhamdulillah. And
Mm,
I not only that I know that, I speak it too. Um,
yeah,
and I cannot find the replacement for mashallah,
yeah, yeah. It's like
right?
a just genuine appreciation. Yeah, and for our listeners as well, inshallah. means like with God's willingness or with God's will. And often I associated inshallah as a kid with meaning that things weren't going to happen, because I'd be like, oh, I like, can we buy this toy? Inshallah, inshallah.
Well, yeah, like
And it's a soft
in
way of
terms of, it's
saying
like God,
maybe.
God willing slash you wish, you literally wish,
Exactly. Well put.
right? Well, I guess mashallah would be OMG in today's term.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that relation. And it's almost like
But it
I
doesn't
think it's
have
also
the
like an added protection element. It's like mashallah, like your child is so beautiful, but there's no, it's almost like protected from any like jealousy connotations, isn't it? It's like I'm saying mashallah because this is something beautiful, and that's
praise be to
it.
God. Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah. I haven't thought about it that way. So how then you um what's your journey like from being a Middle Eastern kid raised by her grandma in Surrey and to actually eventually build your own business? Is it something that you always wanted as a child to be an entrepreneur?
Well, to be honest, as a child, I would sometimes think or get the question. I was like, what did you want to be as a child? And all I can
Uh-huh.
remember really is that as a child, I loved dancing. I loved moving my body. I loved singing, getting into weird pretzel shapes on the floor, and just imagining,
Hmm.
playing, reading, all that stuff, which is common to a lot of kids, right?
Hmm.
But I also dreamt of going to the moon and stars, astronaut style. I
Wow.
just knew that I wanted to stay connected to a sense of playfulness, but also like connected to the sense of the universe in some way. And I also always
Mm-hmm.
had those big questions, like, oh, imagine if I wake up and I'm starting a new life every day, and those sorts of things. Um, so yeah, I mean, my parents did put certain like ideas into my head, like, oh, if she reads a lot, maybe law would be great. Um, My grandfather thought I
So,
looked like a news reporter that he liked. Oh, maybe news reporting.
so what then? So you studied psychology, um, and I know that you're very much concerned also with the female biology and how we function and so on. So what was the impetus? What sparked the idea to build Kayal and Yoga?
Sure. So yeah, kind of I moved through that journey of yeah, studying psychology, started becoming more and more interested in the brain and differences. My brother is autistic as well, so a lot of my upbringing was like, oh, what's going on in his mind? Like he thinks very differently, or he acts very differently to me. So it was just kind of this very intense curiosity I had about other people and the mind, and my own mind as well. And then through psychology, kind of linked into things around mental health. I think studying psychology attracts a type
Mhm.
of person who is sometimes,
Mhm.
too curious, if you could say that, or not curious enough, or maybe just the right amount of curious.
Mhm.
But yeah, so since then, I also stumbled across something called dance movement psychotherapy, which was
Mhm.
very intriguing to me because it was this idea that you could use your body and movement to connect certain dots from your current self and current maybe limitations and limiting beliefs that are holding you back with movement, and you can actually build the bridges from how you might act now to where it started, and then with that awareness, move forward and in a way that serves you, or create not new limiting beliefs, new beliefs that serve you, to replace those limiting beliefs that did not, or no longer did. I think there's always a reason that we have the beliefs that we have and the thoughts that we have, and a lot of it is like protective elements around that. But it's kind of about saying thank you, you've been with me for the right amount of time, but I'm ready to let you go. But of course, first the awareness needs to come in. So I was always interested in this aspect, and alongside the movement parts. And I remember during uni, it was like getting close to my last year, I went to a yoga class, and I thought, oh, this is nice. Like this just feels good to stretch. And the teacher was like, oh, have you done yoga before? And I was like, not really. I mean, I like to stretch a lot. Like, is that yoga? Um, and she said, well, not quite, but welcome. And I'm a beginner. So all I knew is that I enjoyed how I felt when I left that class, and then I didn't really go back for a while. I got caught up with my thesis, my studies, and then dipped
Mm,
into another one, different teacher, and also liked it. But the time I actually started getting consistent was right at the end of my master's degree, when I just had lots going on. I had just come out of a relationship. I was feeling quite isolated. I was quite stressed, having to meet lots of deadlines at the same time. And I went to this class, and by the end of the class, I felt like crying, just because I realized I hadn't given myself that time or moment to just stop and to let myself kind of
mm.
land in my body.
Just go, go, go.
And I wanted to just hug the teacher. Yeah, yeah, because that would be my default really, just go, go, go. As soon as I have a bit of spare time, it's like, oh no, I can do something with that spare time. Like, let's book something in. It
Yeah,
wasn't
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
completely
I know
just
what you
do,
mean.
yeah, maybe not. Yeah. Um, so yeah, that's kind of how it started. At the time when I came across yoga, I had actually come off the contraceptive pill. This was when I about the class that I came out like wanting to cry of. And I still hadn't got a period. So even though I was off the pill, I didn't have a period,
Mhm.
and it was very confusing. The doctors told me it's
Mm,
normal, your body's still regulating, getting it back. But
mhm,
then a year
mhm.
passed and it still hadn't arrived. 2 years passed, it still hadn't arrived. 3 years, I think I had like a moment of spotting at some point, but there was still lots of issues going on there.
Mm,
I had experiences of disordered eating that I think contributed, and also just a lack of awareness that actually menstrual health is a key indicator of our overall health.
mm,
And
mhm,
looking
mhm,
back, I can see the patterns, and also my lifestyle of being go, go, go. Got into a phase
yeah.
where I was dancing a lot. I joined a dance team, was training, and that training always happened at about 7 p.m. kind of time. So I think,
Mhm,
oh, maybe I'll just have something small. I don't want to go full, but then I don't want to leave,
yeah.
and have dinner really late either. So I ended up, having that disordered eating pattern, um,
Mm,
which now I've learned, well, after learning a bit about, female physiology and the body and how it works,
mhm,
is that, well, my body can't be sure that it's going to get the right amount of nutrients to be able to menstruate and ovulate.
mm,
And if I did want to get
mm,
pregnant and have a baby, it's kind of like, well, I'm not confident that you're going to get the right amount of nutrients to be able to follow through with a pregnancy. So my body is kind of in a way protecting me by not allowing me to menstruate. Um,
mm.
so I didn't at the time, I didn't know any of this, and I just thought, oh well, I guess I just wait. Like I don't really know what else to do, and that's what doctors kept telling me. They said, oh, you can go back on the pill, and that'll give you um a cycle again. But
Mhm.
it wouldn't have been the natural
Natural.
bleed that we
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Um.
That is
So
so um so tell me more about how women should take more a closer look on their cycle, because many of us, we see we only think about our cycle only when we're PMSing and menstruating. We forget about the good days.
yeah.
Right? um but I often advise women to, if you want to or able to schedule your big thing, schedule it when you're ovulating, because then that's when you'll be like more in the zone with the best energy. Da, 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 da. Um, but we rarely even notice it when we're ovulating, do we? Unless we're like actively trying to make babies. So, what's your
Yeah.
advice for women to, instead of only thinking about the bad ones, like, oh, I'm PMSing, that's why I'm bloated, da da da, but also to leverage the good and the best days?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think first bringing into awareness what a healthy cycle looks like. And this will
Mm-hmm.
look different depending on if what contraception you're using. So if somebody's using a hormonal
Mm-hmm.
contraception, they might not feel the certain spikes of energy and drops as intensely as someone who is not on hormonal contraception. So just important to say
Mm.
that. And people experience it differently as well, because whilst,
Yep.
for you, the PMS and the menstruation part might feel like the worst, the bad side, and then the others are good. For
Yeah.
others, it's different,
The dark
especially if
side.
somebody is very yeah, especially if someone's very introverted. That spike in energy that we get during follicular phase and ovulation, that happens because we have rising estrogen levels in our body. But
Mm-hmm.
for
Mm-hmm.
introverted people, that might be quite conflicting because the energy in the body is more out there, but
Yeah.
that means like, oh no, I need to like be more visible and show up more, and that's more difficult. And
Mm-hmm.
actually what feels a bit more like home is the luteal phase, because then we get the calming effects of progesterone rising, and the
Right.
ability to go inwards comes more naturally than it
Yeah.
would when we're ovulating or close to that phase. But yeah, absolutely. I think follicular phase, which is the week just after your period, well, I say the week, it depends on the length of your cycle. Some people have a 28-day
Yes.
cycle, some people have 36, 38. That depends. But more or less, if we're talking generally, more or less a week. That's the great
Mm-hmm.
time to challenge yourself, like those things that you've found difficult. I don't know if you're practicing handstands or something, and you're like, oh, like I'm just losing motivation because it doesn't seem to be working. It's a great time to come back to it and start it. Or if you're working on a project for your business, um,
Mm-hmm.
and there's like a really sticky point, maybe actually coming back to it during
Mm.
follicular, you might feel more able and energized to approach that challenge. And then there's also a good time to kind of set intentions, act on the plans, and then as you move into ovulation, that I always say that's a great time to celebrate any of those plans that you've executed just before. Um, also, networking, any networking events, I think it's great. And that's not to say you can't go to a networking event if you're PMSing. Like I did that actually in the last one where
Oh
we
yeah, of
met.
course.
Um, yeah, but it might be like a different energy. Maybe the energy is a bit more
Yeah.
like wise woman energy that you embody. That is a bit more like
Yeah.
maybe a bit more inwards, but still you're confident, you're out there, you
Mm-hmm.
know what you're doing. And maybe if you're in your ovulation phase, feeling good about being a bit more out there, bubbly, speaking to lots of people. I think it just helps with self-compassion as well. Like I know for
Mm-hmm.
myself, I was feeling a little bit more inwards, not as open as I usually would be. But I
Mm-hmm.
also just knowing that, oh, it's okay. Like I can show up in a different way, just as good, and feel authentic as well, rather than try and force myself to go and speak to every single person and make sure I get everyone's detail, and just be natural, right, as much as possible.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And
I
back in
mean,
the day,
I like.
menstruation. Sorry.
No, I think I like to see it as a wave, and we are the surfer. Like, instead of like um going against it, against the wave, we just ride the wave when it comes.
Mm,
And as with hormones, essentially they come in waves, right? and and we have to
yeah.
ride when we're uh when the progesterone is high, this is how we ride the wave, and vice versa. And so, what would you say to people asking, so what's the difference between Kayalin yoga and other yoga, as in other yoga businesses?
Sure, sure. Firstly, I love what you said about like going with the waves rather than against them,
Yeah.
because I think often it can feel
Hmm.
like swimming against the tide when we don't know, when we're not aware of our cycles, and that's something that that
Yes.
was happening with me when I wasn't getting my period. I was going to my dance training thinking like really giving it my all and being like, oh, why aren't I doing as well as I did the other day, and not really
Mm-hmm.
understanding why. So then when I started actually, moving with the tides and with my flow, I was able to honor each of that, knowing and the knowledge and confidence that actually I know that I'm going to come back, and then start improving. Then I started focusing, building on my technique and stuff in the first half of my cycle, and then just maintaining it in the second half rather than pushing the whole way through. And just quickly on that as well, at some point I was speaking with a therapist, and I remember I would like sometimes I would feel like, oh, this is an issue. I really need to talk about it. Yeah, this is what I want to work on. I'm ready to be vulnerable and let it all out. And then other times I'd be like, I actually really don't want to talk about this. I don't even want to go to my session. Like, I feel good now. I'm fine. I'm smashing it. Like, and looking back, it's like if that, yeah, it makes sense that sometimes I was more inclined to talk about things, and sometimes I didn't want to. Sometimes I wanted to be more outwards and not really go deep inwards. And it makes sense. And just having that knowledge now is like, yeah, I just might show up differently. And then to your second question, you asked me about what's the difference between um, Kaling Yoga, like my business, and other yoga businesses. Um, I think every entrepreneur kind of shapes their business in a way that reflects what they're interested in, what they're passionate about, what they want to bring
Yes.
out. So Kayalin Yoga for me is a mixture of the yoga offerings that I have, which are holistic yoga. So you might have heard of things like Vinyasa, which is a bit more flowy, Ashtanga, which is a very set structure that you go through each class. And there's like things like Yin Yoga, restorative Yin, which is a bit more, names on the tin, restorative. Um, and I see the value in all of those different styles of classes, um, especially as somebody who's going through that cyclical rhythm. You know, as male bodies have the circadian rhythm, 24-hour cycles, which we also have as female-bodied people. Um, but we also have that longer cycle, and it's just as present hormonally as the circadian rhythm, the sleep-wake cycle is. And if you think about how our society and culture is placed at the moment, it is very patriarchal,
Mm-hmm.
and because of that, it's very much like, wake up at the same day, do the same thing every day, stick to your habits, same thing every day, and that actually doesn't, that is kind of swimming against the waves, against the
Yep.
tides for us. So yeah, the main thing about my business, it incorporates the menstrual cycle into the offerings, into when I work one-to-one with people, when I do my yoga
Mm-hmm.
classes. Obviously, it's tricky sometimes because everyone might be in a different phase, but I always emphasize that, honor where you are, consider where you are in your cycle. It might be a bit more like this, a bit more like that. Even if
Mm-hmm.
there are guys, I also teach in studios and gyms, and sometimes there are male-bodied individuals in the room. And I still say it because I think it's just as important for men to know about. They
Yeah.
probably know somebody who menstruates. The world runs together. Studies have shown that, diverse
Well,
diversity in the workplace and
that person came out of someone's womb. So
exactly. They were
we all
created when
know.
someone was ovulating.
Exactly. So I love that you incorporate cycle into your work, because again, if we cater to um, when we work, if we cater to our personality, our leadership type, our um, type of our temperament type, and what else, our cultural upbringing, why do we not incorporate our cycle, which is like the thing that we actually we came with it. The toy comes with the battery. We come with our cycle. We even respect people who say, oh, I'm a morning person, right? Or I'm a night
Mm,
owl. But we
yeah.
should respect that, well, I am on this period of my cycle. So the conversation should be as easy. Well, one, because you need self-awareness, right? First of all. And
Yeah.
secondly, if and again, it's not to make excuses. The same way like when people say I'm a night owl, it's not like well, don't book a meeting with me at 8 in the morning, because it's not about me gonna be late for that meeting. It's more about, well, would you like me to be at my most productive or not? Right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what would you right? What would your advice be for people to get to, as people say, to normalize conversations? Because conversations around menstrual cycle is still considered as not taboo, but TMI.
Mm, yeah. Definitely the first step is awareness, because it's yeah, because of that too much information thing. First is awareness of, do you understand that just having like the menstrual cycle is a lot more than just having a period and not having a period, that there are more
Yeah.
fluctuations. And I would say the first step is in
Mm-hmm.
understanding that, because I think there's a tendency in society to associate the cycle with something negative, because we only really talk about it sometimes when we're feeling pain, maybe period pain, or feeling those mood swings,
Yeah.
like, oh, it becomes like such a negative
Mm-hmm.
connotation with the menstrual cycle. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, starting to, but once you have that awareness about yourself, being like, oh yeah, it's interesting. I've noticed that I can get loads more done when I'm in my follicular phase, or I've seen that I can get into a state of flow quicker actually when I'm in luteal phase, when I'm PMSing, like those admin tasks for me personally that I find quite boring. Um, when I'm in luteal phase, like the week before my period, I'm actually quite good at just sitting down and banging them out in terms of admin tasks. But
Mm-hmm.
then that would bore
Mm.
me to death when I'm in my follicular and ovulation. That'd be the last thing I could focus on,
Right.
because I would want to be doing different things and, being more like up
Mm-hmm.
here. Whereas, yeah, my luteal phase, I'm a bit more like, down here. And I think there are superpowers, if you like, in each
Mm-hmm.
phase.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, it's been a journey for me to start embracing the luteal and luteal premenstrual phase. So PMS premenstrual
Mm.
phase is like the few days just before your period, but luteal phase kind of refers to the
Yeah.
second half of the cycle altogether.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I would say in answer to your question, step one, awareness. Step two, maybe just starting to share with your friends, starting to bring it in where it feels comfortable, and
Mm-hmm.
considering if you're in a a position, and if you have a team or something like that, maybe
Yeah.
considering having something like a menstrual cycle policy, or menstrual health policy or something like that, and encouraging a
Mm-hmm.
culture of where it's safe to share those things. And also knowing that,
Yeah.
say, somebody needs to take it a bit easier because they're menstruating, knowing that if they rest, if you're all about productivity, they're likely to be more productive if they've had a sufficient amount of rest in the menstrual cycle, because it's all linked, right? So sometimes the reason we
Yeah.
experience quite severe PMS symptoms is because we haven't rested enough in the cycle before that, or in the
Mm-hmm.
same cycle, I
Yes.
should say, in the few weeks before.
Yes, I think it could also be um because I'm always interested in marketing language. Like anything can be marketed differently. So if we would want to call it, instead of follicular phase or luteal phase, because it sounds very biological, medical, right? And if we want to call it just like, I'm at week 1, I'm at week 2,
Mm.
or cycle 1, cycle 2, you don't even have to remember the correct medical term, but you know where you are on your timeline,
Mm.
and
You could use inner
start talking
seasons as
about it.
well.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Although in my head, when you talk about season, I'm like, oh, which episode? Which TV series? But yeah, I think I'm gonna try that actually. I'm gonna try that with my team. We have 15 women in our team. Um, and I think it would be so good that if we have just one way of um, cataloging, um, just like, okay, Rebecca is on week 1, and then somebody else on week 2, and it's almost similar approach as when I ask my team member. I know it's not hard science like cycle. When you ask someone about their star sign, it's
Mm.
almost like, I want to know your star sign because I want to know you better and I want to understand you better when you do certain things, or when you're being your quirky self, you know? Or when I'm having a hard time understanding you, I want to be able to empathize at least, right? So yeah, I think if you
Um,
come with the approach, uh, just like knowing someone's star sign, it would be less of a TMI, because um, zodiac has been marketed as something that is so fun. I cannot even
yeah, no,
believe that to this
absolutely.
day. Yeah, I mean, people are still debating about climate change, but people are still so very interested about astrology.
Mm. And it's not taboo. It's not, it doesn't have that taboo element to it. So yeah, definitely
Exactly.
explaining a little bit about why you want to find out about that and why you feel it's important for the team maybe themselves to be aware of their own cycles, because some people might have no idea. They'll be like, what week? And also with the weeks, just bearing in mind that the lengths might be different and some people might have very irregular
Yeah.
periods. So I think just a general awareness within the team of like, this is
Mm.
what a healthy cycle looks like, and there are things you can do if it's really like irregular or if it's not coming, and there are ways that we can encourage it to regulate. So yeah, people use inner seasons quite commonly as well, with winter being menstruation, and then so on, ovulation being your summer, um, which makes sense in when you think about it, as autumn being the time when you're like starting to collect things, starting to wind down, and menstruation, you're like, right, just gonna
Right.
chill,
Let's
rest, or
forget
maybe
about
even still
everything.
work on your business, but the minimal. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like I just want to
And for people,
Netflix and chill.
yeah, and just honoring whatever comes. I think I guess as a yoga teacher, I would say like I actually think it's such a good time to meditate and just place the hands underneath the lower abdomen and take a few deep breaths and just
Mhm.
see what comes in terms of what comes to mind, what comes to the body. Sometimes you can get these little sparkles of wisdom. Because back in the day, women were kind of respected for being on their period. They were given the time and space, because they would receive wisdom and insights during that time. So yeah, they would just kind
Mm.
of go into the cave and have that time to themselves. And the people who were outside of that and knew that that person would come out with something to say, like something significant. Um,
Yeah,
I
how
find that
very
really interesting as
interesting.
well.
And I want to go back to the discussion that we had pre-recording. Um, and I really want to then geek out and find more books about it. So tell me more about the history of women before patriarchy. So women used to run the world.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. There used to be a fully functioning matrifocal society, and this is actually something I've only learnt about quite recently through another friend called Olivia, who also works in the cyclical living space. And she has recommended a few books to me, which I will need to pull out from somewhere, and maybe we can add them to the show notes or something, because I can't remember them off the
Yep.
top of my head. But essentially, matrifocal societies existed for way longer than the patriarchy, which has only been around for 4,000 years. Um,
Mm,
and there wasn't there wasn't really trade back then. It was more community living. It was more like
mhm.
the kids, other people's kids were also your kids. It was more looking out for each other.
Yep.
And archaeologists have found things like fewer signs of violence and bruising and things like that, and fractures on the bones um, in that time, which is super interesting. And the other thing that, what I mentioned to you before that I find fascinating is that women's statures were larger. So our shoulders were larger, we were like taller, and even hips, feet, had bigger hands, bigger feet. That was all much larger. But then over time, and I think through the patriarchy, we kind of evolved in a different way and actually became a little bit smaller in features. But
Mm,
that's something that blew my mind.
yeah. It blew my mind the first time I heard it from you half an hour ago. But so do you know more about like when we used to run the world, did we have a different cycle?
So I think back then, women are very connected to the seasons and also the moon phases. And
Okay.
there are some theories that before electricity, but well, full moon, generally, if you don't have a cycle, it's said that you can try using the phases of the moon. And whilst it might sound a bit woo-woo, it's really built on a lot of ancient wisdom that people would use back in the day. So the full moon is associated with ovulation, and some theories behind that are because when before electricity there was full moon, it shone some lights in, so you could actually see the person. There was more possibilities, potential for attraction, and things like that. So that's when people kind of got together, had sex, hooked up, and so on. And then menstruation, because that's the time to kind of go inwards. Often that's associated with new moon when we can't see the
Mhm.
moon, so the sky's completely dark.
Yeah.
Um, and I think there was an increased connection to the moon. Now it's not so common for women to cycle with the moon phases, just like
Mm,
naturally. So
mm,
definitely, if you're not on any hormonal contraception and you have that natural
yeah.
cycle, I would say tune into your own body because see
Mhm.
things have changed. We have electricity now. Don't try and force your cycle to go with the moon phases. Don't do that. But if you don't have a cycle, and for whatever reason, if you're, menopause or you just don't have a cycle for similar reasons that I did a few years
Mm,
ago, then using the moon can be a very valuable tool to make sure you're getting those elements of rest and downtime, and also the elements of being active and out there.
mm,
There's also something called seed cycling, which is
mm,
a really interesting one to look into. With some seeds, like pumpkin seeds and flaxseed, can support the rising estrogen levels, whereas like sunflower and sesame seeds support the rising progesterone, and you kind of cycle them. First half of the cycle, you have pumpkin and flaxseed, and second half of the cycle you have sunflower and sesame, and you just cycle that round. And that's something that I believe helped me get my period back. when I found out about that. And I was using the moon because I didn't have a cycle, so I just used the moon phases
Yeah.
to help me keep track.
Wow, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Gosh, really, my wish for my daughter is that she'll grow up in a society where it's so common to discuss all of this, because it needs to be common knowledge, like how to open a bank account, you know, because
Mm,
while bank only existed in the last 100 years, um, we female bodies have been in a biological menstrual cycle since Eve, you know. So
yeah, and it affects us every single day. So we
exactly,
why don't we know more about it?
exactly what I'm saying. So tying that to your most recent appointment in the happiness index, tell me more about what you do, and if you would then suggest for every company to have a happiness department.
Sure. So yeah, the happiness index was a job I started quite recently. I've just been there just over a month now. Um,
Hmm.
as a happiness executive, I work with other companies around their employee well-being. But the way we do that is
Hmm.
not just by looking at employee productivity and engagement, we also look
Hmm.
at employee happiness. And it's all based on neuroscience principles. So we look at things like psychological safety, like does this person feel safe to make a mistake at work? Do they feel safe to
Hmm.
disagree with their manager, colleague, whatever?
Hmm.
Um, and all that links in to things like retention, how long someone stays within an organization, with how much they're willing to give in that
Hmm.
company. So it's all connected. We believe essentially there's a direct link between happiness and engagement,
Of
and it's not
course, yes.
necessarily the other way around. And
Mm.
loads of studies have shown it. The more happy you are, the more engaged and productive you're likely to be. So it's essentially at the happiness index. It's showing that to companies and saying this is a really important focus, not just for life and well-being, but also for your business. Um, having that interest in your employees is essential. And one of the things that I actually asked in my interview before I got the job, I
Mhm.
said, okay, if you're all about employee happiness and well-being, do you ever consider the menstrual cycle? Maybe in me. That was my question to them, and I said, do you have any questions for us?
And then what did they say?
Um, and he And so, yeah, so the co-founder said, actually, we've got a menstrual health and menopause group that happens once a month,
Mhm.
at the Happiness Index for internal employees. And it is something that we talk about and would share with other companies, as relevant. So, yeah, when he said that, and then he showed some understanding about the menstrual cycle as well, and that made me happy because it showed that there are more men understanding the impact of menstrual
Mm.
health in the workplace.
Yeah, I mean, you can talk about being an ally all day long, but if you don't even understand a cycle, you know, what does that say about you,
Yeah,
right? So on a day-to-day basis, um so in essence you give a consult to the employers who are joining the platform. Tell me a bit more.
yeah. So my role is actually in sales because that's something I wanted to build.
Mhm.
Um, just for my knowledge, I didn't study business, I didn't study
Yeah.
sales and marketing, I studied psychology, and it wasn't business psychology.
Hmm.
So in a way, I wanted to really
Yeah.
increase those skills, which often as a woman you're
Hmm.
told, oh, don't bother with that, or we think it's not really for us or whatever.
Hmm.
So yeah, shift some ideas about that I had in my mind and thought, actually, I'm going to try out like more of a sales role, but in a company that I really want to sell what they're selling, that I agree with, that I think is a really valuable tool. So yeah, I found the happiness index, and I have to say, so far it's been a really positive experience. Um, and our founder, Matt Phelan, has written some really good books on happiness in the workplace, happiness in business. There's one called The Business
Mm.
Case for Happiness as well, which I think is brilliant.
Oh.
And a woman called Jackie is actually the one who set up the menstrual health groups. So it's been
Mm-hmm.
really great learning about different people's experiences and just having a space to talk about it as well, even though
Mm-hmm.
you're in the working day. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
it.
that's very interesting. So, that being said, all of that conversation about our health, both mental, physical, cycle, um, if Nour, not if, when Nour is king, what does that kingdom looks like?
When Noor is king, would bring the matrifocal society back into play. And that,
Mm,
but in it, maybe in a slightly more modern, with a modern twist, where actually there is still a sense of trade. I think we're in a very different position to where we were all those years ago, but it would still be more and more women in places of leadership,
yeah.
as politicians, like leaders engaging with each other. I genuinely believe that there would be less war and violence going on if there were more women in positions of power.
Yes, absolutely. And the period product will be free, won't it?
Absolutely.
That's that's gonna be your first
Absolutely.
victory.
Yeah, yeah, there would not be any sort of tax on menstrual products. I think that comes as a given. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That should be part of the, you know, you need food, clothing, and shelter. Period product should be part of it, logically, right? So thank you so much for sharing your experiences, your wisdom, sharing your belief as well, and your advice. I genuinely hope that we are going to normalize that we are people who menstruate, and we are we have the female body, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and also the best, because we are the ones that has a hormonal cycle that also will bring the best version of us. And that is, thank you, Nour, for reminding me that our cycle does not revolve around the period itself, but it's our whole thing. And the pain,
Mm,
the bloating, the acne, whatever it is just one speck of our whole cycle, and that we should ride the wave instead of trying to swim against the current. Thank you so much, Nour, for having a chat with me.
mm.
And for everybody else listening, tell me more about who you would like me to interview on this podcast. Who you would like to hear the origin story, their opinions about things, their belief system, and their ideal utopian society look like. Send me an email to rebecca@upgradingwomen.com. See you in the next
Yeah.
episode. Bye.
Thank you, Rebecca.